All right, welcome back to the TechMuze podcast. I am your host, Dezz Asante. You can find everything we do over at techmuseacademy.com. Welcome to part 3 of our mini-series on basic theory for the songwriter and the producer. In part 1, we talked about how to determine what notes are in a key. Is the F supposed to be a sharp or not? We used the 2 tones and a semitone, 3 tones and a semitone formula to determine that, so you can figure out what notes are in any key. If you missed that, go back and check out part 1. In part 2, we discussed, once we're aware of what notes are in the key, what are the chords that we can make from those notes. So there was 7 notes and 7 chords. We covered that in part 1 as well. 7 notes and 7 chords. In part 2, we dug a little deeper into the chords and determined ways in which we can alter the notes within the chord to create different flavors. For example, what's the difference between a major and a minor chord? What's a diminished or an augmented chord or a suspended chord? So if you need to bone up on that, go back and check out part 2 of this series. And today I want to dig a little deeper into chords. Now, the whole purpose behind me putting together this series was to give producers and songwriters some tools to help them if they ever get stuck in a creative rut. If you're anything like me, I'm a guitar player, so a lot of the times I pick up my guitar and my hands just do the things they've always done, and I start to lack the ability to really explore new ideas, and sometimes I need a little kickstart. And often when I'm in those types of situations, I'll put my instrument down, grab a pencil and paper, and jot a few things out using some of this theory that I've learned over the years. And that sometimes gives me something fresh to then grab my instrument, try it out, see what it sounds like, explore it, twist it, tweak it, and maybe come up with something new. So that's the idea here. So again, we pick a key, we determine the chords, we maybe write down a small chord progression. You could even write it in numbers, 1, 3, 4, 5, could be the chord progression. And again, go back to part 1 if you want to develop a better understanding as to what that means. Then you can figure out, do you want to break some of the rules? Do you want to change the type of chord it is? Maybe that chord 3 is supposed to be an E minor. Well, what happens if you play an E major there, or an E sus4, or an E augmented? So that was what we covered in lesson 2. I want to go deeper now. We talked so far when it comes to chords, all we've discussed are 3-note chords. So the root, the 3rd, and the 5th of the key. We've determined that we can alter those, flatten the 3, flatten the 5, raise them, etc., to get these different flavors. But now I want to talk about adding the 4th note onto the chord. Let's have a look at the piano for a second, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Once again, I like to speak in the key of C because it's easiest to understand, as it is just white keys on the piano. There are no sharps or flats, no black keys in this scale. So we've got Do. There's your do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, okay? And again, we talked about when you build a chord, you take the 1st note from the scale, you skip a note, you take the 3rd note, you skip a note again, you take the 5th note. Well, today I want to skip one more, the 7th note into the chord. And this automatically gives us an added layer of color to the chord, which you might find musically useful in some of your creations. So once we add that 4th note in, then again, there are ways in which we can flatten things and raise things to get these all sorts of new flavors yet again on top of what we covered in the last part, okay? So let's take a look. If we take notes 1, 3, 5, and 7 straight out of the major scale, so in the key of C, it's all the white keys. Let me go into chord mode so you can hear what it sounds like. 1, 3, 5, 7. We'll play the chord. Again, without the 7, if I just play the C major chord, 1, 3, and 5, there's a nice, typical sound, major chord, bright, happy kind of sound. I can even add the C again on the top. That's not really changing anything. It's just making the chord. I haven't added any new notes because there's already a C in there. I just put one on the top as well. Nothing wrong with that. Now, again, here, play it again. Now let me put the 7 in. You hear how it almost brightens it even further. And it adds a little color, a little something different to the sound instead of a straight, quote unquote, boring major chord. We've added that 7th in for a little character, okay? So 1, 3, 5, 7, right out of the major scale is what's referred to as a major 7 chord, okay? It's a major chord with the 7 right from the scale. We haven't adjusted it, flattened it, or anything like that. So we refer to that as a C major 7, okay? So that's one type of 4-note chord or 7th chord, okay? The other thing we can do right off the bat is we can take that 7 and flatten it by 1 semitone. So now I'm playing 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. This is a sound you'll probably recognize. Have a listen. That's that bluesy, blues rock kind of, it's referred to as a dominant 7th chord. And I won't confuse you with why it's called a dominant 7th chord at the moment. Just to suffice it to say, that's what it's called. Oftentimes you'll see this written as C7. In this case, it's a C chord we're playing. C major 7 would be the first chord, C major 7. If you see just C7, it means play the C major chord with the flattened 7, which gives it that sort of bluesy sort of character. Again, major 7, dominant 7. Okay, so those are the two things we can do with that 7th note. We can't really raise it because when we raise it, it just becomes the same as the root. It becomes the 1 again. So it's not a 7 anymore. So you can play the 7 or you can play the flat 7. There is such a thing as a double flat 7, but we won't get into that right now. For now, we'll stick with the basics that will give you new colors to play with in your productions and songwriting efforts. Okay, so 1, 3, 5, 7, major 7. 1, 3, 5, flat 7, dominant 7th, bluesy sounding, okay? Now let's see if we take, instead of starting with a major chord, let's make it a minor chord. So if you remember from the second part in this series, if we flatten the 3 of the major chord, it becomes a minor chord. Have a listen. Okay? Now let's see what happens when we add the 7 in, the natural 7 right out of the scale. So in this case, it's a B. Have a listen to this. Very interesting sound. A lot of tension in that chord. Okay? And as you might have guessed if you were put to the test, this chord would simply be called a minor major 7. It's a minor chord with the major 7th, the 7 right out of the major scale. And I'll tell you, the reason why they call it a major 7, a minor major 7 chord, is because normally the 7 and the 3 follow each other. So if a minor chord flattens the 3, then the 7 would typically be flat as well. And if I play that for you, so we've got 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, that is simply a minor 7. So a major 7, major chord, natural 7, a minor 7, minor chord, flattened 7th, the minor 7th, dropped by 1 semitone or 1 fret or 1 key on the piano, okay? Because the 7 and the 3 normally move together. And if you hear the difference, here's minor 7, here's major 7. They have the characteristics of a standard minor chord and a standard major chord with something extra added. But the minor 7 sounds like a minor chord, the major 7 sounds like a major chord with a little tweak, okay? When I play the minor major 7, now I'm breaking the relationship between the 3 and the 7. They're not moving together anymore. One's flattened, the other one's not. Then you have a listen to the tension that creates. There you go. Very interesting and unique sounding chord, okay? So we've covered major 7, we've covered minor 7, we've covered dominant 7, which is a major chord with the flattened 7. So that's another one of breaking the 3-7 moving in tandem rule, okay? And then there's another one that comes from the diminished chord. If you remember, 1, 3, and 5 is our major chord. 1, flat 3 and 5 is our minor chord. When we close the gap between the 1 and the 5, we diminish it and we get this sound. Okay, now because the 3 and the 7 normally move together, if I put the flat 7 on there as well, have a listen to this sound. That's referred to as a minor 7 with a flat 5. And you'll hear musicians say a minor 7 flat 5. That's what it is. Again, if I take the minor 7, let's just, because I know this can be a little confusing. Let's go right back to major. 1, 3, 5, 7, major 7. Make it a minor 7, we drop the 3 and the 7. So flat 3, flat 7 becomes a minor 7. Flatten that 5, in other words, diminish it, flatten that 5, and we have a minor 7 flat 5. That's exactly what it's called. Ooh, let me get rid of the actual 5. There it is. Minor 7 flat 5. Okay, so hopefully with your ability to add that fourth note into these triads, into these chords that we've been building, you'll even further expand your sort of vocabulary when it comes to harmony and creating chord progressions. And maybe you can go back and revisit some of the earlier tunes that you may have already written and try substituting some of the chords that you originally had with some of these alterations. Let your ear be the judge. We could dig deep as you want into the theory as to what works and what doesn't, and psychoacoustics and why this and why that. But honestly, you have a pair of healthy ears. Just play it. If you like the way it sounds, write it down. If you don't, make another alteration. You can trust your ear. But having some ideas to begin with, I think, is very important. And that's my hope with this series, is to give you guys some ideas. So let's do a quick recap of seventh chords. We've got 1, 3, 5, 7 from the major scale. Remember, everything starts from part 1 in this series. What are the actual notes? Because, for example, if we were in the key of D, F sharp and A is the major chord, because those are the notes that are in the D scale that we determined from the stuff I taught you in part 1 of this series. So make sure you always start with the scale first, write down the notes, then apply these formulas, put them on your instrument, and let your ears do the rest, okay? So once again, 1, 3, 5, 7, major 7. The 3 and the 7 move together, so if we want to make it minor, flat 3, flat 7. Okay. Now, if I break the 3-7 rule and keep it a major chord but flat the 7, we've got dominant 7, very commonly used type of chord, very bluesy, got a little bit of attitude on the end of it. Okay. If I break the 3-7 rule the opposite way, minor 3rd but major 7, we get a minor major 7. That's honestly what it's called. I'm not making that up. A minor major 7, okay? So that's the other instance where the 3 and the 5 don't move together, okay? And then we have this one last one that's based off of the diminished chord. So it's a minor 7 chord, 1, flat 3, and flat 7, but we take the 5 and we flatten it as well. So basically everything has been flattened, and that's called a minor 7, flat 5, okay? Because it is a minor 7 chord with the flattened 5th, all right? And it sounds like this. All right. So hopefully you can take that back to the woodshed there, and get the pencil and paper out, get the instrument out, try changing some existing songs you've already written, try coming up with some brand new ideas. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them or to address them in a subsequent part in this series, and I will see you next time.